Good morning. This is Ken Long with a personal learning reflection for the True Storytelling Train the Trainer course, session number 3 on emplotment. It's February 2nd, 2021. So, principle number 3, plot in true storytelling, is about creating stories with clear plots to support two outcomes, creating clear directions and to help with setting priorities. We talked about 4 models of plot: linear, cyclic, spiral, and rhizomatic. Linear and cyclic, in my view, are closed systems. Spirals allow you to raise altitude or lower altitude, and so it's an open system. And rhizomatic is almost like DNA propagation and mangrove forest expansion. Each story prompts new stories, and so you have an expanding wave of change. And so the plot, what's going on, the game we're playing, the situation, falls into one of those 4. Think about the difference in the sound of the way we frame the plot, the game that we're playing. Number 1, we're struggling for hearts and minds here, and we want to contend so that we can win, versus we're moving together with our music to create new possibilities in this space. So could be talking about the same thing, but the way we choose to frame that sets up entirely different expectations for what's possible and the way forward. That's what we mean by plot. Think about the difference between strategic direction, having a strategic direction, and wandering usefully in new places. So strategic direction is a choice and a priority and an intention. Wandering usefully in a space maybe is more open-ended. So what's the nature of our inquiry and our intended outcome? If we think about exploring narrative or story spaces, we could ask, well, how can we explore that space? How can we or should we navigate? How would we map it in a useful way as we go? And then how can we evaluate the opportunities and the spaces that we saw? So this gets into what game are we playing and how do we frame it, and how does that help shape the possibilities in the later principles. The plot style that we choose is going to affect some choices on timing. That's connected to some critical thinking principles about before you jump into problem solving, you might want to look first at how you frame that problem. But before you frame that problem, you want to make sure that you found the right problem to work on, and then frame it in an intentional way. And then that should lead to a problem solving strategy that can be useful. I just felt like a lot of the choices that we can make in plot and the way we create sparks reminded me of the KonMari method of decluttering, that pick up an object and does it spark joy? We're looking for that moment of connection and inspiration. I thought about our communications in this storytelling and guiding and dialogue has the form of the communications model, in which we have experiences and education and preferences and knowledge arranged in a non-linear word web in our head, that when we try to communicate, that becomes a linear process, and that linear process is decoded and then recoded into a mental model inside our other person's head, where they're creating that non-linear word web. And so to what extent our stories and the plots we choose and the style of telling them helping us make that transition from the word web of meaning in my head to the word web of meaning in your head, so that we have some kind of basis of common understanding about which to proceed. And that led me to think about communication in general and the possibilities of dialogue and discourse, that when we make the brave offer to reveal our thinking and the sense that we've made and lay that on the discourse table, that really is an act of courage, and that Schumpeter's ideas of creative destruction when he thinks about capitalism and social forces is really at play here, that the previous pieces and parts of stories and the parts of events that are floating around looking to connect to make sense, all of that is a dynamic process. And so his thoughts on creative destruction, creating the seeds by which the phoenix of the next story may arise, seem to be useful. And that took me back to Lewin's ideas about, in the Lewin change model, about unfreezing the current situation so that we can play with the rearrangement and the restorying, and then when we settle on something that feels correct, proper, then refreezing. And then the connections to Jung's archetypes and the ideas of tropes and forms and myths and scripts and cultural references and waypoints is all part of that, the tools of the trade of restoring. We talked about the difference between genuine Bohmian dialogue, free-form, open-ended, non-contrived, non-deterministic quantum dialogues, and the sort of focus-structured, guided, protreptic dialogue that is central to true storytelling and the idea of guiding. The notion that the real world is complex, the real world is not a metaphor, and should be respected for that. Don't try to oversimplify it. In one of our breakout sessions, this turned out to be a useful model, in my view, that instead of searching for simplicity to understand things, that recognizing the complexity of the world, you can go the other direction. And so you may be able to create space by adding a new degree of freedom or a new point of view. So if you're having trouble coming down to the point or the single explanatory magic bullet, if you add a point, now you have a line, and now the point can be seen as a member of the line in relationship to the other members of the line, that they share something in common, and that may give you a different insight about the point that you were trying to get to. And then the line may be the challenge in trying to understand what it means in context. So if I add a third point, nonlinear, I now can create a plane or a square, and now I can see the line with respect to the larger structure that it is a part of, and now it makes more sense. Instead of a line in isolation, it's now a part of something larger that allows me to make sense. Well, the plane or the square, the face might be challenging. I can add a non-planar point, and now I've created a cube, and now I have volume and depth and context and different points of view on a 360-degree rotational basis. And then that's a static, but if I now put that cube in motion, I might realize, oh, it's actually a slinky, and so now I have dynamics in terms of time and space, and I've added a dimension of time. And then taken together, I might have combinations of dynamics and statics over time and the rates of change. So sometimes trying to find new ways, you might find it helpful to add complexity rather than decomplexificate something, trying to get to just the single point. Overly simplistic. Don't make the world simpler than it is. I'm reminded, anyway, of Sturgeon's law. 90% of everything is crap, so don't worry about it too much. Which gets me to practical change management in the world, and I think of when I've been successful with change management that three populations have changed, that there are optimists and true believers, and realists who have a measured view of the world, and then maybe the pessimists who say, hey, been there, done that, I've seen this before, and I'm not going to get on board, I'm not going to invest in it. And they can often be the naysayers. Well, if you don't have members of each population in there, you have an incomplete view of this dynamic world. And so I think of things like what I want, what I'd settle for, and what I get. And if I'm thinking of transportation, what I want is a Tesla. What I would settle for is a 5-year-old Toyota Celica that is reliable and cost efficient. But what I get is a good pair of comfortable shoes that I could maybe walk home in if I'm drunk. Well, if that aligns with optimist, realist, and pessimist, where I have had success is that if I think about the pessimists, if I can help them create a win as the pessimist, that the other two, the realists and the optimists, will certainly find something useful and helpful, and I don't even have to work too hard on that. So instead of trying to fight the pessimists, I try to engage with them and see it from their point of view. And what can I do that in this environment, what can we shape so that they're getting something out of this, and maybe we can encourage them to participate instead of being naysayers automatically and rejecting, but maybe there's a way to unfreeze them. We had a discussion in the follow-on session about the power of 4 and the metaphor of roots, branches, leaves, and seeds is a real organic, natural, expansive propagating wave, a rhizomatic style of true storytelling that respects where our values and stories and experiences and background and values and identity come from in the roots, and the branches, including the trunk, that represent the stable organizational structures on which we can build with some strength. And then the leaves are the manifestations of transactions and story exchange and communications that have a life cycle, that we gather light and energy from the environment, and then that feeds the tree, and then when it's time and the seasons happen and the leaves fall to the ground and become mulch and enrich the soil for future growth. Well, is this producing seeds that can help propagate, or is this a closed-end system that doesn't propagate? Well, if it's healthy and natural and expansive, then those transactions that we're engaging in storytelling are generating seeds that fall on that ground that has been nourished by the leaves of previous stories. And now these wave of change that emerge from the true storytelling and those values propagate the forest rhizomatically, and then adapt and respond to the environment over time. And if it's healthy, it grows and gets better. Well, inside of that kind of frame of reference, then we could think about the roles that we're playing while we're trying to engage in that community of practice of storytelling. Maybe we are engaging in those new variables to create space and perspective, as I outlined in that model. Maybe that's what consulting does, is that when you come into that situation that is locked in stasis, whether it's a point, a line, a square, a cube, or slinky, or whatever, the addition of you as that extra new player, that new variable, might be the new combinations that weren't seen before, that now give us new space in which to operate and reconsider and restore. And if you think about the power of factorial, 1 factorial is 1, 2 factorial is 2, 3 factorial is 6, 4 factorial is 24. So as you keep adding one more new variable, the possibilities begin to get geometric. So now as I think about the experience, the phenomenology of watching those changes happen, I think about inside my little square here, I have a changing part and an unchanging part, and that as I am watching the actors, forces, structures, and events in my environment, there's a time when I'm waiting and a time when I'm watching the new thing come in, and then I can receive it, and then I can hold it, and then I can use it, and then I can release it, and then I can watch as it goes back out into the world and the changes that it underwent in that little sequence, and what did I add to it, and how did I change it, and how did it change me, and what part of me is changing in relation to the world through my engagements, and what part of me is unchanging. And in fact, isn't the unchanging part of me also changing at some deep level, if I'm being honest? And isn't the changing part of me also unchanging in the sense that it's always undergoing these transformations? And so there's a yin and yang feeling associated with that model that I find compelling. We can think then about the environment we're in and what's the pattern currently in play. What are the stories that are already there, and how can we enter that environment, or how do we enter those stories? What's the entry point? Where are the leverage points? Where are the handles? Where are the valves? What can we bring? If I come back to the roots, branches, leaves, and seeds metaphor, I've also experienced the idea of the story roundabout as a place of safety, then trust, then truth, and then opportunity, which seems to align pretty nicely with the tree metaphor here. That if we want the opportunity to rework the world, and we want to do that from a truthful basis, first we must have trust in ourselves, our stories, our partners, and beginning with safety. That if we can create a safe space, then trust can grow, and from that safety and trust, truth may emerge, and then there's an opportunity to work with that new addition of truth into the environment. Maybe that's the variable that we're adding with true storytelling, is the opportunity for truth to have a voice in what's going on. And then I see the relationship in those two four-part models. That roots give us safety and depth and values and endurance, protection against the weather. That the branches are strong enough, that our structures are strong enough to provide us leverage and the ability to trust in their strength and to do things with them. That the leaves are the places where truth is emerging, each one temporal, momentary, real, feeds forward, beautiful to see, and goes through a life cycle of finding, generating, telling, leveraging, propagating truth. And then the seeds, distilling the essence of those down to traverse time and space, to fall in fertile soil, that growth may occur in the future. And in this way, we're developing opportunities through truth-telling in trustworthy spaces with trustworthy people, in safe spaces that act as a foundation. So I'll be taking those and looking through the lens of the next little technical session on the 6 eventums to see how these sensibilities map to that chunk. And then I'm mindful of Grace Ann's continuing listing of the nuts and bolts, the practical how to do things as a craftsman, as an artist, as an artisan, as an apprentice, in designing, planning, running, managing, leveraging these sessions, how to elicit questions, how to introduce people, how to gently but firmly guide how to manage time, how to use and leverage and value homework, how to use parking lots to respect the things that emerge but aren't ready for the recipe yet, how to call on people, and the idea of wanting to build out consolidated nuts and bolts from all the sessions as sort of a practitioner's handbook. So those are the spaces and places that I went to over the last 48 hours with session 3, plot, creating stories with clear plots that help create direction and can help us set priorities. Thanks for your kind attention. There's my contact info. Happy to talk about it. Cheers.